Hello, and welcome to this Bitwise webinar on modernizing your dispute management application on the cloud. My name is Nathan Nichols, Head of Partnerships here at Bitwise, and joining me today is our very own Sastry, who plays a key role in the cards and payments capability with Bitwise. Sastry brings expertise in card payments across issuing and acquiring, mobile payments, and core banking, with engagements spanning projects for issuers, acquirers, and networks across various geographies. Before I pass things over to Sastry, let me first provide a quick introduction to Bitwise. Bitwise, a global technology consulting and services company, uses over 23 years of enterprise data and digital experience to help bridge gaps between traditional tools and cutting-edge technologies, including big data and cloud. What truly sets Bitwise apart is our technology leadership in creating unique accelerators and frameworks that reduce the time, complexity, and cost of large-scale initiatives such as cloud migrations. As a technology solutions provider, we help our global clients leverage data to enable business insights and maximize their competitive advantage. To this end, we partner with the leading cloud providers, including Google, AWS, and Azure. Quick note before moving on, we will have a Q&A at the end of this session. If you have any questions during the session, feel free to send those via the question feature or contact us at any time at sales@bitwiseglobal.com. And with that, I'd like to pass things over to Sastry. Sastry?
Yeah, thank you, Nathan, and good morning to everybody, and hope everybody is keeping safe in this particular times. So before we delve into the topic of reimaging the dispute application, let's look at the broader picture and see why this is necessitated. Broadly, the challenges that the acquirers face can be categorized into two. Challenges that are common to all the acquirers in the acquiring industry, and the technology challenges that are specific to some of the acquirers. Now, acquiring is a low margin business, and acquirers have very little leverage on the pricing. So they need to offset this by making the technology and operational processes more efficient. Also, acquirers also heavily burdened with the need to comply with regulations. You have the card brand regulations and mandates, and then you have the regulations issued by the statutory bodies. You have things like, for example, AML and GDPR that you need to comply with. Then moving on, if you look at a particular study by a leading research group, the merchant attrition is typically upward of 15% annually. And this is because it is relatively easy for merchants to switch providers. So whilst pricing could be one of the reasons, more often than not, it's the service quality that drives merchants to switch. Then in many countries, there are newer payment methods being implemented. For example, you have QR, which is prevalent in the Far East, and then you have UPI in India. So merchants would prefer to have a one-shop payment provider rather than having to deal with multiple providers for different payment methods. Then you have market saturation. Essentially, growth in the developed markets has peaked with relatively less opportunity for expansion. So growth can be achieved only at the expense of other acquirers. So once again, pricing and service quality becomes important. And then finally, merchants need to be the acquirers need to be constantly vigilant about data privacy and security. And all of these add to the processing costs. Now, moving on to the technology challenges, we all know merchant acquiring businesses is essentially technology intensive, and this technology keeps evolving with new standards. There are new payment methods, new devices being constantly introduced, and acquirers are required to stay apace to be relevant in the market. Then some of the acquirers not only have to incur the maintenance costs, but also license fees for the off-the-shelf products. Some acquirers who may be using DPMS frameworks, for example, may be paying annual license fees over and above the maintenance cost for their core application. Also, especially with the legacy applications, the code over a period of time becomes large and complex because these applications have evolved over time. So the documentation will also be outdated. So making changes to such applications is very time consuming and requires a lot of testing. Essentially, you're losing the agility to be able to make quick changes. Uh, Again, if you run your own data center and you have monolithic applications, then scaling becomes another issue because likely you are capacitized for peak volumes. And even though this peak volume is typically for a relatively small duration, so you're paying for capacity that you're likely using very sparingly. Then you also run the risk of obsolescence because with the technology constantly evolving, this means you will be saddled with sunk cost on redundant hardware and software. So all of these items that we are talking about are adding to your overheads. And since merchant acquirers do not have much control on the interchange and the card brand fees, reducing IT costs and improving operational efficiencies will contribute to the improvement in margin. Nathan, can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. Now, since this webinar is about modernizing your dispute application, let us spend some time talking about the dispute management function. The slide shown here provides a view of the dispute application and its interaction with the internal and external world. I will not go into the details of the dispute application. I'm assuming that most of you are aware of the functionalities of the dispute application. The point that I would like to make, and I hope you will agree, that increasingly dispute management can be considered to be a key component of the merchant service proposition, and that improper handling of dispute will result in losses to the merchant, or for that matter to the payment acquirer, and also lead to the merchant attrition. Now, almost all of the technology challenges that we talked about in the previous slide would also by and large be applicable here. For example, dispute applications are also subject to the biannual compliance changes mandated by the card brands. You could be potentially incurring annual license costs over and above the application maintenance cost for your dispute application. You could be incurring additional unnecessary overheads and merchant dissatisfaction because of improper handling of the dispute function. So even though the dispute function is not really a core revenue generating function, you will want to you will want to minimize the processing costs and increase the level of automation for disputes. Now, it is our belief that irrespective of the card brand, the geography, or the payment method, a single multi-tenant dispute application based on modern day architecture running on the cloud will help reduce the cost of providing dispute servicing. So we'll share some insight in how migrating to the cloud and using modern architectural practices will help improve the service and reduce your costs. So Nathan, if you don't mind, move to the next slide. So let's first talk about the benefits of migrating to the cloud. Now, one of the biggest advantages of cloud is the ability to scale up and down on demand. This means you can have the scale required to support Thanksgiving shopping and then scale down to normal levels after that. Now, this saves you money since you're not paying for the idle capacity. You only pay for what you use. Moving on, you can configure a cloud service to provide the kind of uptime and availability that you require depending on your application. For example, you can choose to have a very high availability for your authorization application, but have only site contingency for something like a dispute application. Then most of these cloud service providers allow you global reach at the same time. So you can deploy the application on the cloud and service any market. So you'll be able to quickly enter any market. The additional advantage you also have is, as the footprint of these cloud service providers expand, you can also choose the geographies in which you can deploy your application. The other additional benefit is that most of these cloud service providers provide you open source tooling. So whilst you can go for the licensed software, proprietary software, you're better off, to the extent possible, sticking to the open source tooling provided by the service providers. And also, if you opt for something like a platform as a service offering, then you are relieved of the task of keeping the underlying service suppliers provided software up to date, as typically the service provider, the cloud service provider takes care of all of these things, and you focus only on your application. Now, moving on to security and data privacy. This is essentially a shared responsibility. Typically, the cloud service provider take care of the lower end, the security and at a lower level. But there are guidelines. There are PCI DSS guidelines available for data security on the card data stored on the cloud. So overall, cloud helps you reducing your IT costs. It helps you improve your service availability and helps you focus on your core business without having to worry about the IT infrastructure. Nathan, if you don't mind, move to the next. Yeah. So we also, so we listed out some of the recommendations that we would have for the architecture for cloud native applications. And one of the things we would advocate is the use of microservices. Essentially, what this means is you decompose the entire dispute functionality into smaller interdependent components, and then develop these components with an interface. So what this does is it allows you to scale at the microservice level. You can scale only those components which need scaling, and then the service can be used in other contexts where similar capabilities required. Simplest example I would say is where the same service can be invoked irrespective of the channel invoking it. We would also recommend going for event-driven architecture because this facilitates loose coupling and scalability by separating the message to be processed from the consuming service. For example, in disputes, you have a common set of actions that can be taken, whether the card brand SLA expires, or if there's no response received from the merchant, or when the merchant response is received, but he accepts liability. So the events may be different, but the action to be taken is common. So you can leverage a common set of code. And if there are minor variations, and these can at best be managed as parameters. We'd also recommend the use of a configurable open source rules engine because it helps you achieve at least two things. One is essentially the rule engine provides for a rule-based dispersal of the dispute cases, and only those cases which require manual intervention, which cannot be resolved using the business rules, will be placed in the prioritized queue for the manual action. So you're again increasing the level of automation and reducing the manual efforts in resolving disputes. And the second thing is that because the rule engine sits at the center of the application to monitor the occurrence of any event, it also is able to orchestrate all the service invocations. We also already talked about the open source tooling in the previous slide. So again, we recommend the use of open source tooling because it helps you keep your costs down and also helps you port your applications across the various cloud services that are out there. So in short, if I may summarize in the kicker in the slide below. So if you re-architect your application using modern design principles, it helps you reduce your application complexity, makes it simpler to make changes for the biannual card brand mandates, and helps you bring down your overall cost down. Nathan, if you don't mind moving to the next slide. So we plan to demonstrate the dispute application that we have hosted on the cloud. But before that, we want to set some context. The slide shown here provides a 50,000 feet view of the dispute application. You have the core dispute application at the center with an integrated rules engine. It drives the bulk of the core disputes processes such as the SLA management, automated dispute resolution, etc. Then you have interfaces to the card brand for receiving and sending dispute information. Now, these interfaces can be either API based or batch or both, depending on the card brand. Then you have interfaces to the referencing data for enriching the dispute information with the contextual information of the dispute, such as the transaction for which is being disputed, or the merchant at which the disputed transaction is taking place, and so on and so forth. You also have the interfaces with the various internal applications, whether it's the GL or with the merchant settlement application or whatever else. And then finally, you have the merchant notification channels through which you might want to communicate to the merchant of the receipt of disputes or whatever other events. And then you expose all of this to the merchant or the internal user in the form of a merchant API or a merchant portal, and for the internal users in the form of the analyst portal. Now, I just want to make a point here is that what we are going to demo is not an off-the-shelf product. It is something that we have developed and we have kept on we hosted on the cloud. We are going to demonstrate a very small part of that particular functionality. So I just wanted to set the context before we get into the demo. Nathan, I think I'll need to take the control for the demo. Is my screen visible, Nathan?
Yes.
So this is this is our the way we have envisioned this, and it could be different depending on your context and what your preferences are. Uh, so typically, when a user logs in and is authenticated, you could show him a kind of a summary of the work that needs to be worked upon. And what is shown depends on that particular user. If the user is the person with a higher set of privileges, then you would typically show more information as compared to a user who is just working on the disputes. So in this case, what we have shown is the typical screen that would be seen by, let's say, a supervisor. A supervisor will be able to see the cases that are under his purview or the quantum of work that is under his purview, and the work could be divided into various queues. Now, these queues are entirely up to you in terms of how you, how you define those queues, and a lot of it will depend on how you organize your work. You could be organized along geographical lines, or you could be organized around card brands, or it could be organized around, you could have a situation where some of your dispute analysts will work on, let's say, only chargebacks, and others work only on arbitration or whatever. So, or it could be a combination of all of that. So, how the queues are organized and how the work is assigned to users is entirely up to how that particular organization works. Secondly, the assignment of the cases to the individual users can either be a rule-based automated process, especially if the volumes are large, or it could be a manual process, where you select cases and sort of assign it to individual users, or it could be a combination of the two. The idea is just to show what is the art of possible. And then again, you can also show, for example, here we are showing the critical amount. Essentially, what this means is this totals all the cases which are about for which the SLA is expiring, let's say today and tomorrow. So this is what you get to see when you land on the page. Now, when you talk about users can belong to groups. A user can belong to one group, or a user can belong to multiple groups. For example, if you are organized along geographies, you can have a user part of, let's say, a Europe group, or a user part of the Asia Pac group, or a user who is part of only one group, and he or she will be able to access and work only on cases pertaining to a certain region or whatever. So how this thing is structured is entirely up to you. The other thing we also have on this on this particular page is, these are all the cases, let's say, which are ready to be worked upon, but you could also have some exception cases. For example, the reference data that we talked about in the previous slide. My case the context is not fully complete because I couldn't find the reference data, and I might need to have some manual processes to have that sorted out. In this scenario, what we are going to demo is, for example, you have a situation where typically when a card brand sends you a dispute, they may also send you a document along with that, and there could be instances where the document is expected but not received. In most cases, the user is able to work on such cases and take it to its logical conclusion. But in certain instances, there will be a need for the user to wait till the document arrives to look at the document before he or she can take whatever action needs to be taken. So we'll demo to you how we can have that image once it is received from the card brand, how it can be linked to this particular case. So when I click on this. And this is typical of all the other queues also. When I click on this, it will show me all the cases that are lined up to be worked upon in that particular queue. Now I can search in this particular thing to see to get to a specific case. For example, okay, so I can take this particular case and I can click and view this particular case. Now, if you look at this particular screen, there are two parts to this. One is the part where I need to take an action, where I need to take the image that the card brand has sent and link it to the case or associate with the case. And the second part is, if I look at what is shown here, this is typically what I would anyway display to the user once the case has been fully enriched with all the reference information and all the images. It will show me the various information that are relevant for the user to be able to work on the case and take it to its logical conclusion. You can also, collapse some of these panels here or expand these panels depending on whatever information that the user wants to look at more closely. You can, for example, the other thing that typically users spend a lot of time on is if they have to do some kind of audit trail of what happened on a particular case, they need to go and dig through various reports and all of that. But here you can have the ability to, keep a track of the various events and the activities that have been taking place on the case. So you don't need to go and check multiple sources. Uh, just a second. Now, so let's add an image to this. I've kept something ready here. So, okay, okay, okay. So 1 second. So I kept an image ready, so that's what I would be able to easily drag and drop. So let's see if I can drag and drop here. Okay, here you go. Okay, so I uploaded the image and I'm waiting for the system process to be completed. So the image got uploaded and the case has been, if I go back to my queues, I can see that, one of the cases has moved to the next stage for to be worked upon. So, like I said, this is not a full-fledged demo given the time constraint that we have, and I think we are almost running out of time. So I quickly wrap up. Nathan, can you go back to the PowerPoint? Yeah. Can you move to the next slide? So the point that we are making here is that if you're planning to move to the cloud, or if you're planning to move your applications to the cloud, then you might want to consider a partner who is familiar with undertaking similar journeys. We have helped clients with their cloud journeys. We help our clients formulate the enterprise cloud strategy. We help them define the roadmap for the migration to the cloud. We have a significant pool of architects who are certified in GCP, in AWS, and Azure, and who have hands-on experience working on migrating applications and developing cloud-native applications. We also have several accelerators specifically for disputes. For example, we have a comprehensive process module which we can use, which we can bring to the table to discuss and understand your specific processes. We don't need to sit down and learn your process from scratch. We will bring our reference models and use that reference model to drive the discussion. Our repository of business requirements can help serve as a guide for you to go through your process of formulating your business requirements. Now, all of our accelerators are underpinned by our delivery methodology. We have a well-established distributed delivery, agile delivery methodology. So the point that I'd like to make here is that when you try to undertake a journey to migrate to cloud, and especially with cloud-native applications, having a system integrator who has prior experience on the typical issues and the challenges that you will encounter will sort of mitigate against some of the risks that you will face, because we bring our experience, our learnings to the table, and our accelerators to the table. So rather than you taking this journey entirely by yourself. Nathan, would you want to add anything to
that? Yeah, Sastry. So thanks for the presentation. And I think that brings us to the conclusion of how do we get started. And as you can see, Bitwise brings payments domain expertise and extensive experience in helping global companies move to the cloud. Combined with our partnerships with leading cloud providers, we're well positioned to help you ensure a successful dispute application modernization initiative. So whether you are exploring use case, evaluating tools, or need help building your strategy and roadmap, Bitwise can certainly help you get started. And to do that, you can contact us at sales@bitwiseglobal.com to explore strategy assessment options or get a technical deep dive into the solution we just presented. So that concludes our session for today. Before we move into the Q&A, I just want to take a moment to thank Sastry for sharing his expertise, and especially thank you for taking time to join us today. We do have time for a few questions, so let's move into that now. And as I mentioned, you can send your questions via the question feature, or we'll get through what we can in the time remaining, or we can always reach out to you directly at say if we're not able to get to your question. And always you can reach us at sales@bitwiseglobal.com. So Sastry, the first question revolves around challenges of migrating to cloud. So, for those organizations that have not made that move yet, what are some of those challenges for migrating to cloud?
So I would say it, first of all, depends on the context of that particular organization which is migrating to cloud. So if they are not considered migration to cloud at all, then that itself is an exercise in terms of coming up with a cloud migration strategy. But if the query is specific, let's say to migrating a dispute application, then yes, there are challenges and differences, between an on-prem application and a cloud-based application. One of the things, for example, you need to focus is on security, especially since we are dealing with card information. For example, one of the aspects you need to consider is the separation of the card data environment and the non-card data environment, and solutioning for this while applying the PCI DSS guidelines. You also need to pay attention to the architecture because architecting for the cloud is a lot different from, let me say, the architecting for the cloud is different from architecting for on-prem applications. For example, if you go for a platform as a service situation, then you will need an architect for some of the tooling as a managed service as compared to a dedicated tool set being available to you for your application on the on-prem. So also, if you're new to the cloud, then there's a learning curve. So if you're doing it entirely by yourself, then be ready for the learning curve, because some of the issues you'll encounter with the cloud is unlike what you would have encountered with the on-prem. So I hope that answers the question. Obviously, it's a lot bigger answer than that, and like I said, it depends on the context of the organization. So, but hopefully this gives a flavor of what it is.
Yeah, certainly that's a broad question to answer in a short amount of time. As far as moving on, another question that is fairly common is, what is typical timeline for a project of this scale?
Again, a lot of it depends on the context. The first thing you will need to do is to go through the kind of an evaluation process. If you're not embarked on your cloud journey, then you need to do a proper assessment of the various cloud providers out there and see which of them is more fit for your situation. So again, it all depends on where you are on the cloud journey. So I hope that answers the question.
Sure. Again, a broad question, and I think one that we see is there's really no typical timeline. It depends on, like you said, where you're at in the journey, and the scope of the application that you're looking to migrate. So with that, Sastry, we're coming up on time, so just want to wrap things up here. Thank you, Sastry, again for sharing today. And thank you, everyone, for joining, taking time out of your day. We look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.